Bitcoin is the most important human rights technology of the 21st century. It creates agency and it creates independence and sovereignty. Bitcoin is a technology for preventing the waste of energy and for allowing us to scale and to be more abundant and to use more energy without waste.
Today's episode is a powerful one. I'm joined by Alex Gladstein, Chief Strategy Officer at the Human Rights Foundation. Alex has dedicated his career to defending civil liberties around the globe. And in this conversation, we explore how Bitcoin is emerging as one of the most powerful tools for human rights in the world's most repressive regimes. From women activists in Afghanistan fighting for the right to education, to groundbreaking efforts in Africa where Bitcoin mining is being used to slash energy costs, Alex brings us stories from the front lines. Stories of courage, resilience, and the fight for freedom that Bitcoin is helping to enable. This episode is eye-opening and deeply inspiring. Welcome to True Alternatives, a Stone Ridge series exploring unique and highly valuable perspectives on today's most challenging topics. I'm your host, Marc Feuerstein. True Alternatives brings you insights not only from leading experts, but from those offering unconventional and bold perspectives, grounded in data, experience, and truth. As a reminder, all investing involves risk. Principal loss is possible. This podcast is not investment advice, and the opinions expressed here do not represent a formal or official view of Stone Ridge. Alex Gladstein, welcome to True Alternatives.
Thanks for having me.
I'm kind of obsessed with this question, which I've been thinking long about as I've gotten to know you. But I'm dying to know kind of what brought you into human rights work.
It was curiosity about the world around me. I went to high school outside of New York City around the year 2000. 9/11 happened, the invasion of Iraq happened. I got very interested in the world around me. And I was originally going to study the hard sciences and engineering. And those political events just were so kind of heavy on me that I was keen to learn a little bit more about why they were happening, what was going on. So I ended up pivoting to study Middle Eastern studies and international relations at Tufts. And while I was there, I was looking for a job, obviously, and this was getting towards the financial crisis. And it was not easy to get a job at the time, especially in the nonprofit field. It just was like people were really trimming. But I was able to get an internship in 2007 at essentially a human rights startup in New York, which was called the Human Rights Foundation, which the creator, Thor Halvorsen, I think wisely named a somewhat, I don't want to say bland, but, kind of a boring, old fashioned name so that it sounded, establishment, which was smart at the time, had a very kind of not that wild or exciting logo at the time, at the beginning. And, I think he was trying to take something that didn't exist, at the beginning of 2005 and spin it up into impact. And that I think was the right call, because I saw the job posting and I was like, wow, this is cool. So I wanted to apply. I ended up getting the internship. It was a small office in New York at the time. And that summer I spent learning a lot of things, about a lot of different aspects of global human rights work, but I was pretty hands-on with a few projects, including our program to help get information into Cuba, which at the time didn't have internet. And the mandate of the Human Rights Foundation has always been to focus on dictatorships and authoritarian regimes. There's a reasoning for that, which we can get into later, which we should get into. It's really important. But in any event, a lot of time was spent on Cuba, and I would be sitting in a closet, which is where I worked for that first summer, basically making contraband versions of like films and movies dubbed into Spanish, which my colleagues would then carry into Cuba for the underground library network, which was essentially where people would watch movies and read books and talk to each other in groups of 3 to 4 people, in their homes privately away from the spying eye of the state. And, we're talking stuff like Beat for Vendetta, some Woody Allen stuff, all kinds of interesting things that were political, obviously Animal Farm, things like that. Nothing directly about Cuba, but things that were, about tyranny, authoritarianism, control, just to start discussions. So this is something we did. I really enjoyed it. I was offered a job at the end of the summer, so I completed my final year and then came back and got to get involved with a lot of different things over the first 5-10 years of my career. We, Thor had this idea for a human rights conference that would focus on dissidents themselves and their stories and really focus on tyranny. And that was something I was sort of tasked with helping work on those proposals, those early proposals. We ended up getting a seed money from the John Templeton Foundation in 2007 to be able to do it. That became the Oslo Freedom Forum. We also started working on taking this idea that we had worked on in Cuba to get information in, and activists saw this and they were like, hey, come do that in our country. So we ended up getting involved with North Korea, and I spent a lot of my time in those early years working on going to South Korea, meeting North Koreans who'd escaped, learning from them, figuring out how we could help them. So a lot of my earlier years, when I wasn't working on the organizational stuff or development stuff or marketing and media, I did a lot of things across different areas, which is what happens when you join a startup. Essentially, I did have this focus on technology and how technology could both be obviously bad in the case of surveillance technology and control, but also really liberating and something that could be super powerful against authoritarian regimes. So that equipped me well, I think, for what would come later in my career.
And so I've heard you talk about Bitcoin. So we've got the Human Rights Foundation. Now I want to kind of get into your path to Bitcoin, and I've heard you kind of describe it as your kind of ikigai or kind of your calling of sorts. How did you come to that realization, or how did you get think of Bitcoin as kind of that immense tool in human rights activism?
Yeah, well, it was a long, winding, indirect route. Let's see. At the beginning, and still today, for the most part, money and finances and monetary technology is not something that is discussed at human rights events writ large, right? So you have all these amazing stories, and I saw a lot of incredible testimonies from activists, not just at the Oslo Freedom Forum, but also many, many other events that I went to in my career. And, what was super interesting is that you later learn that money is a struggle always for these people. It's so hard to use, but it's never like part of the talk when they're like, here's my struggle, here's what I'm doing. It's always like in the background. And that's something that started to become clear to me later when I started looking at Bitcoin, right? So, I'm a very skeptical person. So especially at the beginning when Bitcoin was so fringe, it was hard for me to take it seriously. I knew about it very early on because Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks founder, spoke at the second Oslo Freedom Forum in person. I met him. And then a year later, he pasted a Bitcoin address to the WikiLeaks Twitter account because of the banking blockade. And I noticed that, and I was like, "That's kind of interesting." And it's like, "Oh, it works. Okay, interesting." But these coins, who knows what they are? Who created them? And it was early years. I mean, this was like very early. So I saw it, moved on. A couple of years later, I went to an event where I met someone who was connected with Ukrainian activists. At that time, Ukraine was ruled by basically a Putin puppet named Yanukovych. And there was a lot of financial crackdowns on people's bank accounts. This was like late 2013. And we were asked to help with a Bitcoin fundraiser. And our chairman at the time, Gary Kasparov, was like open-minded about it. We ended up agreeing to share it, etc. There's still a Reddit post about this, it's still archived. You can see it from that year. It says, only Bitcoin can reach them, exclamation point. And I thought that was really interesting. And that is still today kind of the main use case for this thing. So that was interesting. Then a year later, 2014, one of our donors was like, hey, can I pay for my Oslo Freedom Forum tickets in Bitcoin? We were like, okay. So we ended up learning how to download a wallet, how to receive the coins, how to store them, etc. We stored them so well we forgot about them for a while, but managed to not lose them, thankfully. Yeah, I remember going to a party thrown by one of our supporters. He took me to this party. It was in the Bay Area, and it was like a debate. This was in 2015 now, between one guy was like, you shouldn't buy Bitcoin. And the other person was like, you should definitely make it the center of your savings. And it was so interesting to me. We had brought some activists. We were just hanging out, listening. And I was still wasn't quite sure. Kept going with the work though. I would have to say the biggest unlock was kind of three things happened between, I don't know, let's say 2016 and early 2017 that really did it for me, really made me see the link. One was Bill Tai, who's a friend of ours going back, way back, or early Bitcoiner. He's an angel investor in a lot of things from Uber onwards, was very connected to Richard Branson and many people in that world. And he was like a super early miner, Bitcoin miner, back in the days where you could do it on your computer effectively. And he sort of was like, hey, 2016, he was at our event in San Francisco and he was like, you should really look at this thing. He's like, come visit me in my office and we'll talk about it. So did that. And I was like, okay. And he was on the board of this company called Bitfury, which is a mining company based out of Georgia, the country, not the state. And they ended up coming in to support a workshop in April of 2017 at the Oslo Freedom Forum to connect Bitcoiners with human rights activists. So that was the first kind of programmatic thing we did. At the same time, a friend of mine that I met through South by Southwest connected me to this guy who's his name on the internet is Bitstein. And he's like he was like a very important Bitcoiner at that time. Like it still is today, but at the time he was someone who was very influential. And I didn't know, I wasn't in the Bitcoin scene, right? So I just went to dinner with this guy and I brought Bitstein, and Bitstein's like talking my ear off about Bitcoin. And I'm like, still, but I started to look more into it. So he pushed me. Bill Tai was pushing, started looking more into it. We had Roya, Mahboob, entrepreneur from Afghanistan, speak at the Oslo Freedom Forum. I ended up going to an event with her. I started asking her about Bitcoin stuff, and she was like, yeah, I use Bitcoin. And I was like, really? And she's explaining it to me. We can get into that, but that was super interesting. So I'm like, okay, getting in. And then started, the real kicker was listening to, reading and listening to all the talks and work by Andreas Antonopoulos, which just hit me like a lightning bolt. Like the way he explains the human side of what it is and what is Bitcoin and how it's this neutral money that's for anyone was extremely powerful for me. So it took me a little while to navigate the crypto morass, essentially about a year. Because, when you first get into it, there's a lot, especially at that time, a lot of people printing coins out of thin air, and they, a lot of people who wanted to dump them on retail. So there's a lot of like, hey, what about my coin that makes it more private? Or, hey, what about my coin that decentralizes stuff on the internet? And, I was pretty naive and I was like, oh, that sounds cool. Like great, Zcash or Filecoin or God knows whatever. So, I remember listening to that interview with Naval and Tim Ferriss that summer, 2017. And it's just like, okay. So starting. And then basically by the early 2018, I had it all had clicked for me that Bitcoin was this powerful liberation tool and that I should really do what I can to advance it. So I started asking all of the activists who are part of the Freedom Forum community and the HRF community. And I started just casually just asking them about money and like, hey, so I started learning about hyperinflation, started learning about, frozen bank accounts, capital controls, started realizing that fundraising for them was very difficult, if not, the act of getting someone to say, yes, I'll give you money, but then how do you accept it? How do you take it? That part of it hasn't been discussed that much. And that part of it is a challenge for so many people under authoritarian countries. So this started crystallizing, in those early years, and, figured out that it was wise to have a Bitcoin strategy, which was hard. I remember, because a lot of people in the libertarian community, especially, are like, why favor this one coin? Why not just any coin that's not made by the state? That was kind of their thing. It's kind of like how Malay is today. They just didn't really get the Bitcoin focus. They were like, well, why not just any private money, So that was, pressure. People were like, why is it a Bitcoin thing? Why aren't you including my coin? Got a lot of that. But I really believed in that it was Bitcoin, that it was the tool for freedom and not crypto. And that was something that really paid off in the long term by having that laser beam focus on Bitcoin. It manifested in a bunch more programming in 2019, that the conference we did. And then, of course, there was like the pandemic, but we had already kicked off a lot of this stuff. So we started a Freedom Fellows program that year, and Bitcoin was part of the training. And, back then it was like Bitcoin was really hard to use. Like the wallets were not very good. Like things have gotten so much better these days. But, we saw it. We were like, this is so interesting. So we started launching programs. Even during the pandemic, 2020, we launched our fund. Basically, one guy wrote to us and was like, hey, I'll give you this money, $100,000. Can you start supporting tools for activists? And we were like, okay, why not? So other people joined in, started helping us out. We were able to grow that. That's now a big thing. Talk about that. This is just how it just started going. And all the while I was listening as much as I could, absorbing everything I could. The lessons of the 2017, 2018 era were really profound. And as much as Bitcoin survived this huge attack, essentially, the block size war. And I watched it all in real time, and I was like, this is incredible. How does this thing survive an attack against so many powerful companies and, ostensibly maybe the Chinese government, given that they controlled a lot of the miners. So that was really something that really made me want to believe in it more. I was given talks about it all through that bear market, 2018, 19. Like, there was one talk I remember I was getting ready to give this talk in Greece at this conference, and the price collapsed by like 50%, like in the day that before I went on stage. This was like, late 2019. It was brutal, man.
Yeah.
But I really believed in it, even in that, and believing in it even when it was down was what it made, was really what made the difference. I mean, I remember finally getting a chance to parlay all the connections I'd made in the human rights part of my career with journalists and media. I knew all these folks, these editors. So I finally built up the confidence to write a piece about Bitcoin as freedom money. And we published it in Time magazine. And this was at the bottom of the bear market. So this was of that cycle. So this was December 2019, I believe. And Bitcoin was like 3.5K, something like that. And it went totally viral. And at the time, I didn't have a big following or anything. I was super modest, but I remember the feeling of, being on Twitter, and I was actually with my family. We were in Italy and kind of hiking around, but I could feel my phone every second or 2 seconds. I would get a retweet, a like, for hours, and I was like, "Oh my god, I must have said something." Yeah, I must have said, it was really crazy. I must have said something that people resonate with. This is really interesting. So that gave me more fuel for the fire. And that gave me door to talk to anybody in Bitcoin, because they were interested. Why is this human rights group getting into Bitcoin? So that gave me a lot of access, and it was super helpful. Started going on podcasts, did Bitstein's one, did Peter McCormick's one, did Laura Shin's show. And then just inbound started to come. I started to write more, ended up doing a bunch of essays, ended up doing some books. And then it just, people resonated with what I had to say. And that's why the Ikigai thing, it makes sense to me, because, Ikigai is like this Venn diagram where if you can do what you think is good for the world, then you can do well, for your family, and you're good at it. You can do all three things, then you're like, it clicks. And then it's like, whew, and then things just started coming to me. So it was really quite magical. It still is amazing. It's been about 5 years of that. And what I wanted to do is just continue to develop this thing as a human rights tool and get more people to widely understand this. So now it's like a big program inside the Human Rights Foundation, and it's such a powerful way to advance human rights around the world, especially for people who are most at risk, who are otherwise ignored. And the cool part about it is it doesn't create dependency. It creates agency, and it creates independence and sovereignty for individuals, as opposed to handouts or, like a dollar grant that you apply for and you get, and it's, okay, you've used it all. Okay. Now you're like, what do I do next? These activists who make Bitcoin the center of their operations, it just is a different kind of journey, I will say. So yeah, I'm giving a talk next week at the BPI summit in Washington, which, has a who's who of senators, governors, officials from the White House. And I'm giving a keynote called Bitcoin is the most important human rights technology of the 21st century. And I intend to pack that talk with examples of what, my goal has always been to get people to feel good about their involvement with Bitcoin. I've done a lot of these talks at BlackRock and other places to investors. And I get the sense that they want to be involved in Bitcoin because they think it's going to make them money.
Right.
What they may not realize is that they're getting involved in a global freedom movement, a huge peaceful revolution that they should be super proud of. So that's kind of one message I like to spread.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me personally, I do go to, these Bitcoin conferences, and obviously you read and watch a lot, and it tends to focus on the kind of financial component of it. But what I've always found and what resonates the most with me and watching you, and I've had the great fortune to see you speak live, is the human rights component of this. And I think it's incredibly powerful and a great story. I think that everyone kind of needs to hear. There have been stories that I would love to have you dive in a little bit on kind of real world experiences. One that truly resonated with me. I mean, I do think the things like WikiLeaks are very important, and I think, but I think people probably understand and might see that more. There's one story, and you mentioned Afghanistan before, but I'd love to, have you kind of go through some kind of real world experiences that are outside of the kind of activism world, but, very much people who are using Bitcoin, frankly, for their, empowerment purposes.
Great. Yeah. Let's talk about that. And there's data now. So we were able to help support a independent study out of Cornell at the tech policy school there. And I believe the report is formally launching next week. We got a sneak preview of it at the Oslo Freedom Forum a few weeks ago. But Sarah Krebs, who's a very accomplished academic and scholar on technology and society, is leading a large-scale survey of Bitcoin usage globally, 25,000 plus respondents in 25 countries. And the results are pretty shocking. I mean, they show a very high percentage of people who have used or use Bitcoin, specifically, by the way, not crypto. They looked at Bitcoin and stablecoins specifically. So they have different data sets, but they don't look at crypto. They don't use the word. It's because it's confusing. It's hard to tell what are people doing here. But we're talking like more than 25% of, the population in many countries already. I mean, so we're on the way. If you look at the evolution of the internet, we're probably around the year 2000 in terms of global adoption, right? Where it's like pretty well adopted in like America, like for the most part, like a lot, I would say, like, obviously, if you look at any exchanges filings, you'll see this, but there's tens of millions of Americans who use Bitcoin or invest in Bitcoin, and that number grows every day. But, it was in the year 2000, you started to see a lot of global adoption. Man, you're seeing that. I mean, there's so many people in India and China, and like probably like we're talking hundreds of millions of people here in these countries. And then just so many other countries where it makes sense. So you can look out for that study from Cornell soon to add the data to what I'm about to say, give you some like, actual real life stories. Yeah, the Afghanistan one, very inspiring. Someone who taught me a lot about Bitcoin. Her name's Roya Mahboob. There's a Hollywood film out. It's now on streaming. I think it's called Rule Breakers. Yeah, it's awesome. So it tells the story of her life. And she was someone who fled Afghanistan as a kid into Iran because of the Taliban takeover in the late 90s. Then after the fall of the Taliban, she and her family came back, and some new things started to come into Herat where she lived. And one of them was this like box that had a screen and it talked to other boxes, right? And it's like she was so curious. She wasn't permitted to use it. She was a girl, so she couldn't use it. So she used trickery and convincing and persuasion and managed to get this cafe owner guy to let her to come in and use it. And then she eventually became so good at using it that she was like the repair person for everybody else. And then she eventually gets a job doing this at school, at the university. Then she eventually starts a company employing women to do software stuff. And that's right around the part of the journey where she started using Bitcoin. So that's 2013. So Bitcoin was going from $30 to $100 to $1,000, like in the time when she was starting to use it. Okay. Probably about $100 when she started operationally using it. And then it goes up by 10x, right? So it's like, she's very excited. She's using it because nothing else worked, by the way. It's like, she wasn't like, I want to use Bitcoin. No, it's like, she wanted to use mobile money. Wasn't available. She wanted to use Venmo, PayPal, mobile banking. None of that was available. She even wanted to pay with cash. Not possible really because the male relatives of the women would take it, etc. So, but they all had phones, right? So she figured this out. It worked. Wasn't the most elegant solution, right? Like it's not like people were accepting Bitcoin at that time in Afghanistan in the street markets. But what would happen is her sister would buy back the Bitcoin from the people who earned it whenever they wanted to spend it. Very smart decision by her, by the way. She ended up saving that. That ended up becoming what financed her education at Cornell. Roya's
That's
sister,
awesome.
Alaha, was also in the film. So Roya goes on to, a lot of things, but one of the things she has to deal with is the crash, right? So Bitcoin goes from like $1,300 to $200. Okay. So this is like 2013, 14, 15, right? So she ends up, making everybody whole that she paid, which is very noble of her. And then, they wound this down, but she couldn't shake this idea in her mind that this is money that anybody could use. And it's money that women could use in particular in her country. So she ends up starting a nonprofit called the Digital Citizen Fund, and they start offering Bitcoin classes to teach women how to be financially free. So this proceeds apace. Eventually, she figures out that robotics is a really important thing as well. And she founds the Afghanistan girls robotics team. And this is the famous one that ended up, that's really kind of what the movie's about, but it ends up competing, and they couldn't get a visa to the United States. So they appealed to this was the 2016, 17 era. They ended up, Melania Trump ends up basically like helping them out at the last second. They get into the United States. It was all over the news. And they end up like winning one of these competitions. It's the craziest thing. And it's a fantastic movie. You should definitely watch it. You'll see what this person's made of. But she continues to innovate and educate tens of thousands of young women and girls during that time about Bitcoin and robotics and software programming and all kinds of things. And then she also tries to convince her family. So this was like 2021, early 2021. She's trying to say, hey, she's, realistic about what's going on. I mean, she's obviously super anti-Taliban, but also realistic. Like, hey, this American occupation thing's not going to last forever. So she's trying to tell her parents, like, hey, you should buy some Bitcoin. You should have some Bitcoin just in case. And, she tells me this later that summer, because of course, out of nowhere, nobody, as you remember, nobody predicted this at all. It was kind of like Syria, where Assad fell in like a week. Like in like a week, we went from like, Taliban, okay, now they have taken over the country. So that moment was very important because people had to escape last second. They couldn't bring anything with them. Everything was shut down. There was no banking. So people who had Bitcoin could bring their wealth with them, and people who didn't couldn't. It was pretty simple. So, Roya was okay. Unfortunately, her family didn't listen to her, but many people did. And what happened afterwards was even worse. Like the currency collapsed. Like nobody could get aid in. unless you had Bitcoin, right? So a lot of that has been powered by Bitcoin. And then her education now has become illegal essentially, or at least like not permitted by the Taliban. So it's been whatever it's been, 1,400 days since girls could go to, I think more, 1,500 days since girls could go to school. So she makes that happen. She finances that through Bitcoin. And that's so powerful because the American dollar cannot do that. You read time and time again. There was a guy, Jeff Summer, he writes for the New York Times. He wrote a column 2 days ago. It's in the print edition. He's talking about how Bitcoin's creeping into the American retirement plan as if it's some sort of nefarious menace. And, at least towards the end, he's like, some people recommend 1% to 3%. I wouldn't, but I understand why. It's like, wow, unbelievable. But, he basically says he doesn't understand it. He doesn't get the use case. These people have to look around. I mean, the US dollar technologically cannot finance women's education in Afghanistan. Just can't. Like, there's no way. You can't send a US dollar in that sense. You can send a stable coin, which has its own set of issues in terms of there's so many flavors of them. They're not that compatible. So you end up having usually to use like an exchange, and then there's like ID, and it's just like a huge mess. Bitcoin's way more simple. It's one monetary language for everybody, and it's just super, super easy. It's accepted by all these different wallets and exchanges, as opposed to like Tether on Tron or Tether on ETH or whatever. So you see a lot of stablecoin adoption. There's no question, but at the end of the day, Bitcoin is the freedom money, and it is what's used to do this stuff. And it can power incredible things in a way that the traditional dollar cannot. I mean, if you're sitting there and you're one of these columnists asking or telling your audience that Bitcoin has no use case, I mean, this is a breach of journalistic ethics. I mean, you're not doing your homework, and you're wrong. And that's one of many, many, many examples that we could go through. But it's obviously a very powerful one.
I want to go through one other example, but more on the Bitcoin mining side. I've heard you reference Ross's 2020 investor letter as an inspiring moment for you. Can you talk about your work in Africa and kind of how Ross's letter helped inspire that?
Bitcoin's like this journey that you go down, and every day, every week, whatever, every month, you learn about a new little wrinkle of it, right? So I was always interested in Bitcoin mining. I was more interested in like the censorship resistant part of it. Like, why proof of work created a system with the difficulty adjustment where it was kind of hard to take over the network. I was super interested in the block size wars and how the miners couldn't control Bitcoin. Just because you own 80% of the mining equipment doesn't mean you can control Bitcoin. I found that really interesting. These are important things for people to understand. And that's because there's at the time, there was this FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, doubt about China. I even have, so Nick Carter is a investor in the Bitcoin currency space. He used to make these FUD dice. Okay. So this is I don't know what edition this one is, but they would have things like, doesn't scale, unstable fees, Silk Road, boiling oceans, Tether, Okay. So this one's got, right here, it has, right here, it has helps China. Okay. So at the time, 2020, 2021, I spent an enormous amount of my personal time, which I don't really do anymore, arguing with people about this, where they were like, well, China's controlling Bitcoin, all the mining is there, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, that's not how it works. Like, indeed, CCP ends up basically kicking Bitcoin out. Now, all of a sudden, there's not 75% of the mining in China anymore, TLDR. But at the time, people were like, this was the FUD, China's going to kill Bitcoin. And I wrote this long essay in Quillette, actually, about why can't governments stop Bitcoin? And I went both into the technological and, more importantly, the social reasons why it wouldn't happen. And that's been borne out. But, essentially, that's the kind of stuff I was interested in. I was interested in attacks on Bitcoin. I was interested in mining pools and decentralization. And then I stumbled across Ross's letter, where essentially he was describing how something completely different, a new idea. I mean, every idea in Bitcoin's built on the shoulders of somebody else, but I hadn't seen it articulated in this way before, where it was basically describing how civilization had clustered around, rivers and other kinds of geological features like this. And Bitcoin made it possible for the first time for people to take advantage of energy sources in remote places. That's what he's describing in this thing from more than 5 years ago, and how it would lead to economic activity and new civilization, essentially, in places that have abundant energy, but not necessarily, a population at that moment, at that time, at that place. It would lead to people being able to harness that finally, economically. It would make sense to harness that stuff, and then you'd have everything come online from there. So I saw that, and I just got super interested in that aspect of it, about how it would allow people to harness stranded or wasted energy. I got very interested in the environmental part of it, which I thought was a lot of uneducated drivel, basically. It didn't make a lot of sense and wasn't connected to what was happening in Bitcoin. So I did a big essay a year later, maybe it was like 6 months later, because Ross's letters are at the end of the year, right? So it was like December 2020, right? So I guess April, May 2021, I came out with this piece about Bitcoin as an environmental tool and a force for the environment. And I was exploring how, at the time, as an example, there was a hydro project in the Congo, the DRC, and Virunga National Park, and how this is this place that really should be like Wakanda, basically. This is sort of what the comic book is based on. Like these African countries, some of them have so many natural resources. It's crazy, right? It's like astronomical how much stuff in your pocket and on your desk comes from ultimately some of the rare earths or whatever that are there. And yet they haven't been able to harness it, mainly because they don't have electricity. And there's no capitalistic incentive to go build the electricity there. But they have enormous amounts of geothermal, biomass, hydro, wind, solar, whatever, just everywhere around. And I guess someone had donated some money to build a micro hydro plant near Virunga, which is this amazing national park where there's silverback gorillas, but also 5 million people live there, and Eastern Congo. And the problem is that the demand from the grid wasn't matching the supply, right? So you had to curtail, which is a euphemism for waste, all this energy. And it really prevented renewable green energy from taking over the region because of the build out and basically the OpEx of such a thing. They would fund the CapEx and they would fund the dam, but then it's okay, you have to connect the dam to 5 million people. It's that's not part of the deal. And then it just sits there and it collects dust and vines and it fades back into the jungle. This is what was happening. So the ranger of the park was open-minded, which is the key to every Bitcoin story. Finally, someone has an open mind about something, takes their head out of the sand, literally like an ostrich, looks around, okay, which is what people are doing now everywhere in the world, hopefully, some of them. Certainly you guys have for a long time, but leading the way there. And he says, look, okay, I'll invite some Bitcoin miners. They had reached out to him. Fine, you guys can come down here and take a look. And there's a guy named Seb, who I profile in the piece, who goes down there and explains, hey, we will pay you just to be here and to turn this otherwise wasted hydro energy into Bitcoin. And this was when Bitcoin was in its bear market, right? So they started doing it when Bitcoin was 5, 10K coin or whatever it was. And then they've been doing it for years now. So it's one of the things that's really kept the lights on at the park, helped the environment, protect the environment, help bring on more clean power to the region. And it just makes a lot of sense. So I profiled that, and I profiled a bunch of other kind of essentially phenomena, which would lead you to understand that Bitcoin mining, because of the way it works, because of its very thin margin, sort of cost margins, things like that. It's kind of like gold mining. It's very hard to be profitable. You have to relentlessly seek out the cheapest energy. It's not like AI farming, where the cost of energy doesn't really matter for AI farming. It's more about the chips and national security and other implications. I think a tensor chip, this is maybe the stat is 6 months old, but let's say it's $30,000 for one of these AI chips, and they eat 1,200 watts or something. Well, a Bitcoin chip's like $1,000 or something, and it eats like more power, like 1,800 watts. So put that another way. Bitcoin mining is highly, highly sensitive to the cost of energy, and AI farming isn't. So they're going to have different roles in the world as energy consumers. So I started to understand this and started to see that basically it doesn't make a whole lot of sense ultimately for modular energy to be used by Bitcoin mining. Like, because you don't waste oil, coal as much. It sits there. Put it in a warehouse, sits in a barrel. Like, if you don't need it, you stop digging it out of the ground, right? For fossil fuels. For Bitcoin, it works much better if there's like a baseload amount of power with a variable demand. So this could be nuclear, could be hydro, could be geothermal. It also works really well with intermittent energy because obviously we can't match the supply of wind or solar to the demand of the grid. It doesn't work. That's why we have the duck curve, right? So like batteries, similar, like it can be used beautifully in conjunction with some of these technologies. So I started to see a lot of that. So put that into piece. That was very inspired by Ross's work. And then I met, because I posted that essay, I get a message from a guy I hadn't seen in 10 years, Eric Hersman, who I had met at the Oslo Freedom Forum in 2010 when he was working on a crowdsourcing information project in Kenya. He writes me and he's like, "Hey, I've got a new Bitcoin project. Can we meet for coffee?" And I meet him in San Francisco and we sit down, and like what he tells me just blows my mind. It's basically like Ross's vision come to life. And they're starting a Bitcoin mining company that's going to go after stranded energy, mainly micro hydro. And I was like, man, tell me what I can do to help. So I ended up helping them out in different ways. And then I was really fortunate enough to go visit their sites at the end of 2023. And it was totally changed my world in terms of understanding the world. And two quick stories about that. One was visiting the town of Bondo in Malawi, which is a country that only has like 12% of the population has electricity. So most people don't have it. And you get down there and there's this project that had been funded in 2006 by the Scottish government. It took 10 years to get done, even though it was small, because it's basically development. It's gift. It's altruistic donation. There's no capitalistic, hey, let's stay on schedule here. But finally they had power a couple of years before we got there. And obviously it changed everything. You heard all these stories from chiefs, the local chiefs, explaining like what the difference is just so enormous. People don't even understand. Like, Ross has given these incredible talks about this, but there's really nothing more important than per capita energy use. There's no such thing as a rich country that doesn't use a lot of energy per capita. And you hear these people talk about how it changed medicine, how it changed schooling, grades, how it changed the ability for fathers to be with their family and not have to go into town to watch TV, all these little and big things. And it's just remarkable. And at the same time, we get to meet the power company. And we get to kind of understand that like micro hydro, which makes sense for hundreds of millions of people around the world, doesn't sleep, but the villages sleep, right? So you have this disconnect, this problem where they have to run the energy back into the ground. They can't use it at night. There's no industry in this area. It's in the middle of nowhere, Mount Moulange, right? So then you enter Bitcoin. It changes everything because and ironically, pre-Bitcoin, these people pay an outrageous amount of money for energy, like 40 cents kilowatt or something, where we pay 12 in most places in America. I mean, sometimes it's higher, but like, ironically, it's like way more expensive for people in poor countries to have energy because of this. They don't have grids, like they don't have balancing, markets. So what happens is Bitcoin comes in, a software network. So Gridless brings in miners, plugs them in at the micro hydro station. The Bitcoin network starts buying 100% of all the energy that the town and village and local industries don't consume. 100%. So this means the power company has a lot more money. They can afford to grow, invest in their future, expand, connect more homes. This brings the average cost of power down per person. And the Bitcoin miner makes money. It's really amazing. So what altruism is never going to do, Bill Gates, like the UN, Red Cross, is never going to do. They're never going to do two things. They're never going to increase the monetary technology of the people who need it most, which is what Bitcoin does as its primary use case. It's freedom money, right? Can't be debased, fights inflation, increases your purchasing power. Amazing. At the same time, the other thing they're not going to do is bring all these people online and give them and lift them out of energy poverty. And that 600 million people in Africa just like straight up don't have any electricity. And then billions have energy poverty. Like they only have it parts of the day, different countries, they have blackouts, rolling blackouts, they don't have consistent power. So Bitcoin's going to do both of those things that nobody else is willing to do. And that is quite something else, which is why I end up referring to Bitcoin as the ultimate ESG asset, tongue in cheek, because it is an environmental powerhouse bringing on green and renewable energy. Again, is it going to end up being 100% green and renewable? Because it's going to end up being like 100% nuclear, solar, whatever. It's not going to use oil in 50 years. It's a crazy talk.
Do you have any sense of what the cost came down to in Africa, by the way, from 40 cents? Do you have any idea where it ended?
The project itself, obviously, before Bitcoin was a charitable project. I mean, it wasn't like a capitalistic endeavor. The power company itself was somewhat subsidized, but it allowed the company to end the subsidy essentially. And I think the cost of power ended up being in like the mid to high teens, which is still expensive, but and he can choose to, of course, subsidize from there, but it makes it much more reasonable, right? So I don't know exactly where it started and where it ended, but the point is it makes it way more affordable. The other example that I had on the same trip, which was a revelation, was Kenya, 1,000 miles north, flew up there from Malawi, visited a site, this time a geothermal site, so very different. And Kenya is like a geothermal powerhouse. It's on the Rift Valley. It has ridiculous amounts of gigawatts of totally stranded geothermal that hasn't even been accessed yet. But we were in a place where they did access some of it and visited the mine. It's like a hole in the ground, and hot air comes out and spins a turbine, and the thing's going to run for the next 40 years, delivering the same power every day. It's just super consistent, clean. Okay. So that power goes down to a lake. Go visit the lake. What's going on at the lake? Well, it's a pump. It's pumping water from the lake up to a field. The country is the largest exporter of flowers in the world. European markets, whatever. Okay. So the problem here, again, there's no grid. So whenever the field doesn't need the water, the electricity gets wasted. Okay. So Eric's showing me this, by the way. I'm with Eric Hersman. He's showing me this on a phone because to my left now is a shack with a Starlink running Bitcoin miner. So again, Bitcoin software buying 100% of whatever the pump is not buying. And this is pure capitalism. The Malawi project was more of a social enterprise, right? Subsidies, things like that, made it way easier. This is different. I mean, this is just straight up you start to see how gridless's business model is going to be, where within whatever it is, 18 to 24 months, they are profitable at each one of these sites. They are scaling, they're growing. And it's remarkable because, again, it saves wasted energy. And this is so powerful because you see these things in the media where it's like, Bitcoin consumes as much energy as the country of Argentina. It's like BBC story. Well, what if you just cross out the word consumes and you replace it with the word saves? Bitcoin saves as much energy as the country of Argentina. I mean, then your worldview is completely flipped. Then you're like, wow, that's amazing. Yeah, it is amazing. And that's what's happening. So it's we started distributing these stickers that say, not Bitcoin mining wastes energy, or save wasted energy, mine Bitcoin, depending on, how aggressive you want it to be. But these things, this is true, right? This is 100% true. So it will take a long time for society to understand this, kind of like nuclear power, finally seeing a little bit of a renaissance there. You'll always have detractors. I think it'll always have critics, just like nuclear power, but it's a civilizational upgrade for our energy grid, not just for our monetary system. And that's super powerful because it does both. And I know that Ross understood that from the beginning. And so, he helped me see that, which was and many other people. But it's amazing to watch some things he wrote on a page start to just emerge. I mean, speaking of scale, last year I visited a site in Paraguay connected to the Itapu Dam, which is the world's largest hydroelectric dam. This thing's monstrous. And they've got their own substation out there because normally what happens is Paraguay's got a power sharing agreement with Brazil. So normally what they've done forever is just sell the electricity to Brazil at some cheap cost. Doesn't lead to any development in Paraguay. So this Paraguayan woman and her husband, a German guy, they ended up starting an academy down there, and they were like, how do we raise more money for our academy? And the guy looks up Bitcoin mining on YouTube 3 years ago. And he's just super detail oriented, and he figures out he could actually do this. So they start mining, and then they end up building out this massive 100 megawatt, incredible site. It's like one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And I got to visit it. It's so cool because basically the employees are all former minimum wage workers who get trained to work at this place. And now they have a job where they could go work for Marathon anywhere in the world now. They're like doing the coolest stuff. They repair all their ASICs on site. It's like unbelievable. So you start to see this, like, anywhere. And again, it relates to the flow and the demand of the electricity. So once you start to get this, that like Bitcoin is a technology for preventing the waste of energy and for allowing us to scale and to be more abundant and to use more energy without waste and to use more green and clean energy, you start to understand its pivotal role there, which is connected to, but different from the freedom and commerce roles that it plays, right? So when I gave the talk at Stone Ridge, I separated it into three things, right? Commerce, freedom, and power. And they're all connected, of course, but it's kind of crazy how Bitcoin hits all three. And it's often derided, of course, as useless tool for criminals that wastes energy, which is what governments and the media have been telling us for 10 years. The reality is the total reverse. It's this powerful tool for anybody in the world, in a world where only a very tiny percentage of people are actually bad.
Yeah.
It is so liberating. It's so empowering for entrepreneurs and for businesses. Like just to have one open monetary language in Africa, for example, where they have 45 currencies and they're all collapsing and getting devalued and structural adjustment, all that nonsense. Like, okay, they can just save into a currency that can't be stolen from them. And then they can like cross borders with it and pay in one currency instead of just being trapped in this shell game. And at the same time, it's like bringing electricity online, and it is helping us cut down on waste. And it even has positive externalities. Like that's another thing I saw in Africa. Like it's just a heater. An ASIC, a Bitcoin miner is a heater. All it does is, in one way, right? It takes electricity, creates heat. So you guys have the heat bit in the office there, but it was crazy to see it in Norway when I went visited a site. What they were doing is they were taking it to dry lumber that they used to have to ship to some other country for this processing. They were just, the Bitcoin miners were doing it, for free for this. And I met this lumberjack's like, I don't know what Bitcoin is, but this is awesome. They're like drying my wood for free. It's great. And then in Africa, what they're doing is this, in the Congo, this park ranger, they have all this cocoa. And normally they dry the cocoa by just laying it out on mats. And it's so unsanitary. There's birds, there's animals, like can't be sold in European markets because of this. It takes forever. So they were like going to buy these industrial dryers. And the Bitcoin miners were like, no. Instead of spending $200,000 on dryers, spend $200,000 on Bitcoin miners and let the Bitcoin miners dry the cocoa. So now they're mining Bitcoin and they're drying cocoa super fast. So it's like the heat byproduct of the Bitcoin mining is really interesting, and it can be parlayed into both. Home mining is going to be amazing over the next decade because it's basically, there's no reason not to. If you're heating anything in your home, why not use a Bitcoin miner to do it? There's a great documentary that looks at a spa in Brooklyn where the guy figured out that it was just due to the way that the ASICs work continually as opposed to normal heaters that come on and off and stuff. It actually was more efficient. He paid less to the grid to heat his spa in Brooklyn with Bitcoin miners than with normal water heaters. So, and it's like the miners sit in this fluid and they heat the fluid, and then there's a transfer plate and it heats the water. And he built all this himself off YouTube, and he pays less money to, he's looking at his expenses. He pays less money for the electricity and he's mining Bitcoin. So it's like, you start to understand how this is going to change.
It's a revenue stream for everyone.
Just general infrastructure. And the crazy part is the more that happens, the more decentralized the network gets, the more censorship resistant the network gets. So it all feeds back into freedom and human rights. So that's a very long tangent, but ultimately, if you don't have electricity, you don't have human rights. So the thing hits from many, many different angles.
It's amazing. I mean, we've just checked off Afghan schools, Africa, Norwegian lumberjacks. I mean, only on a conversation about Bitcoin can you possibly do that.
I did have one more thing I really wanted to mention, and that's, again, the work that the Human Rights Foundation does Without it, I wouldn't have seen the magic of the Bitcoin stuff because it forces us to look at authoritarian regimes. That's our mandate. And we really shouldn't have to be forced. According to our data, more than 5.7 billion people in almost 100 countries live under a society that doesn't have competitive elections, that has essentially one party rule, or, it doesn't really have a free independent court system or free press, etc. And the problem is, there's many problems, but one of the biggest problems is the philanthropic deficit. So these are rough numbers, but out of total global philanthropy, only about one out of every $100 goes to civil liberties and democracy's work. Now, of that $1, only about 3 to 5 cents of that dollar goes to authoritarian countries. So you have basically a fraction of a percentage of global philanthropy going towards freedom and human rights and dictatorships, which is crazy. I think that Bitcoin is going to help to transform this for two reasons. Number one, it's going to actually show people that it's possible to make an impact. Like I often say that, look, human rights can be a lot of virtue signaling. Like free this country on Twitter. I mean, what's that really going to do? Nothing. But if you can teach somebody how to be financially independent and sovereign, whether they be in a war-torn region in the Middle East or in Africa or wherever, that's amazing. I mean, that's an immediate freedom upgrade to their life. And you can do that right now. And it's super effective and scales beautifully all around the world. So both because it shows people that doing this kind of work can actually be effective and not just sloganeering, but also because, essentially people involved in Bitcoin are, whether they like it or not involved in it. It's kind of crazy. Like whether you're just investing in Bitcoin because you think it's good for your retirement or because you think it's going to make more money, like, maybe your mindset is, I don't believe in Bitcoin. I think it's an asset that's going to earn me more dollars for my family to use to invest in stocks. Fine. Like, we have two kinds of Bitcoiners, people who want to make money and people who want to fix the money, right? So the make money people don't quite get it yet. The make money people don't understand. The game is not to make more dollars. The game is to never use dollars. The game is to earn more Bitcoin. And it's like the most famous meme in Bitcoin is Neo and Morpheus. And, Neo's saying to Morpheus, like, basically, what do you mean? Are you telling me I can be a Bitcoin millionaire someday and I can sell my Bitcoin for millions? And Morpheus is saying to Neo, no, Neo, what I'm telling you is when the time comes, you won't have to, right? The idea is like, you'll be able to use Bitcoin for money to pay for stuff. And, there's some confusion on that side, but it doesn't really matter. Anybody who's involved, whether with treasury companies or with debt and borrowing and any financial services thing at all related to Bitcoin itself, the network effect, the idea, is an unwilling human rights activist. Or maybe they're willing, but it doesn't matter. So my point is we're going to grow the pie and address this freedom deficit in philanthropy, both indirectly through just the fact that people involved in Bitcoin are promoting freedom around the world, but also because I think it'll give more confidence to folks that they can actually fund stuff that matters and that gets anywhere. I mean, again, Bitcoin's real superpower is that it works for anybody. It doesn't matter what ethnicity, what gender, where you were born. We have this crazy thing in the world where your birthplace dictates your wage and your savings technology. So whether you're born in Nigeria or the United States completely changes how you can live because in one place, the Naira is how you earn and save, which loses 50% every 2 years or whatever. Or you're in America where you can invest, where even though the money loses value pretty quickly, like whatever it is, 5 to 10% a year, it doesn't matter because you can invest in stocks and bonds and all these things. Can't do that in Nigeria. So, we have a world where the average savings technology is like sheet metal or cattle or like collapsing pieces of paper. Bitcoin completely changes that for all these different people. So I think at the end of the day, what really prevents people from seeing this stuff and what maybe even prevented me from seeing it at the beginning was financial privilege, which is one of the titles of my book, Check Your Financial Privilege. And it's true, like where you're born is luck. And unfortunately, like most people are born outside of what's called the golden billion, which is about 1 billion people who live under liberal democracies with free markets and rule of law and free speech. About 1 billion people. The other 7 billion people live under either authoritarian regimes or collapsing economies with no rule of law. So you just have to remember that, like this thing may not immediately be an upgrade to your life, I think you should consider invest. I think it's an amazing long-term investment, like incredible long-term investment for anybody. But you may not understand the day-to-day use cases it has for people around the world,
Yeah.
whether it be for activists who get their bank accounts frozen, which happens in everywhere from Hong Kong to India to Nicaragua to Belarus, or whether it be to get money to where it needs to be fast instead of going through all these rent-seeking intermediaries, or whether it's to fight inflation, which is such a scourge in the world, or whether you're going to see the impact on the energy side. It doesn't really matter. This thing's just out there trucking along, and it's awesome to be part of the journey. And I really celebrate what Stone Ridge has done in pushing Bitcoin forward through its writings and through its proof of work and just through what you guys do. It's had obviously all the effects you know about, but countless butterfly effects that you don't. So thank you guys for doing that. It's amazing.
Thank you. That's awesome to hear. I'm obviously incredibly proud of what we do, but it's amazing to hear. You've been incredibly gracious with your time. So I want to give the opportunity just to let listeners know how they can help you. Obviously, buying Bitcoin and helping to educate people, but how can they help support?
Yeah, I mean, definitely buy Bitcoin. Great idea, but hold it. Figure out how to hold it yourself, even if it's a small amount. I think it's really fun. Try to get your kids once they're teenagers to understand it. Like, there are these things called bit axes. They're small miners that you can plug in at home, and they actually have mine blocks. Like, it's a lotto. It's better odds than a lotto, but it's long odds. But the point is, they actually work. Like, people do mine $250,000 on one of these things, and it's such a cool project for like tech ed for kids in high schools and stuff. They can understand how it starts to work and ask all these questions. It's awesome. So get involved, use it, spend it, buy stuff with it. Earn it. That's one of the, maybe not your main job, but if you're doing some gigs or whatever, ask to be paid in Bitcoin. It's amazing. And if you help out a charity or a nonprofit, you should help them get involved with Bitcoin. It's totally transformational. I mean, what MicroStrategy's done with like the treasury strategy, which is now being copied around, we were fortunately able to do some of that with Bitcoin and from a nonprofit point of view, and it's just completely transformed what we're able to do around the world. I mean, 100xing our power essentially just by choosing a different kind of money. It's unbelievable. Just by choosing a kind of money that we have control over as opposed to we have to ask for permission to use. It's really crazy. So that's more of the Ikigai thing. But use it if you want to get more involved in supporting Bitcoin itself. Bitcoin is an emerging piece of software. It needs maintenance. Even if you don't want necessarily big changes to Bitcoin, it changes all the time because people are fixing small little tweaks and bugs. So if you follow OpTech, which is like a Bitcoin newsletter, you'll see all this. So you can fund those developers through OpenSats or through Brink. That's a really smart thing to do. We do some of that as well, but you can do it through them. Chaincode does a lot of cool stuff in New York City. Go down, check that out. You want to get more involved. Ahrefs does a monthly event at PubKey in New York. You can go down to the PubKey bar. It's like every third Thursday or something, and we do a Bitcoin and Freedom event where you can like meet somebody using it, talk to them. Great little community, really fun. And you can go to some of our events. The capstone one is the Oslo Freedom Forum in Norway. It's this awesome freedom festival where Bitcoin plays a big role. That's at the end of May, early June every year. Next year is going to be June 1 to 3. You can apply to attend at oslofreedomforum.com. You can check out the Human Rights Foundation. You can follow me at Gladstein on X. I have my Nostr credentials in there as well. I'm a big believer in decentralizing social media in the same way that I'm a believer in decentralizing money. And I think that Nostr is eventually, hopefully, what we're all going to use. And also you can think about the impact of Bitcoin on AI and how they're going to interact. And in the same way that we've really pushed Bitcoin as a tool for activists, we're currently doing that with open source AI tools. And the ability for AI just to supercharge the work of activists is going to be so exciting. So you can follow us as we explore all that stuff at ahref.org. And if you're interested in like getting a dose every week of information about financial freedom and Bitcoin, you can check out the Financial Freedom Report, which is this awesome weekly report we have once a week, every Thursday morning. It's got a bunch of stories on financial repression and then a bunch of stories on how people are fighting back with open source code. So if that's interesting to you, you can check out financialfreedomreport.org. But yeah, this has been awesome. Thank you, Marc, for having me. I really appreciate you.
I love how you simplify that Bitcoin's a software. It's a software that cuts the power of or the cost of energy in half in Africa.
Yeah, and it gives anybody property rights in the whole world if they want it, in a way that, again, no NGO and no multilateral organization, no UN body, no Red Cross, and no philanthropist is ever going to do or change, no matter how hard they try. But Bitcoin's going to do it because it aligns incentives. It aligns self-interest. It turns self-interest into freedom for other people. And that's really quite magical. Not even something Satoshi, I think, really quite understood. But now we're living it. So it's been so fun to talk through this stuff with you, Marc. And until next time.
Thank you so much, Alex.